Hello, everyone. I'm Lynn from Run It Back, and joining me today is Eileen from the team FirePOWER. So, FirePOWER are the most recent champions for the Game Changers LATAM North competition. So, Eileen, welcome and congratulations.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, I know that a lot of players or a lot of members aren't familiar with the LATAM teams. So, do you mind sharing a little bit more about the team and the players that make up Firepower?
Yeah. Well, we're a six-woman roster at the moment, so I'm the smoker. We have Monch, she's our IGL. Val, she's our initiator and sometimes duelist. Ju, she's our main duelist at the moment. Gianna is our initiator sentinel. And we also have Akita. She's our sixth player, and she fills for whoever is not in that day. She hasn't had the opportunity to play yet, though. So
Okay. And so your team is relatively new, correct? Like, I was only
yeah.
able to see some history from like just the first Game Changers this year. So, what made you all want to be a team?
Well, some of us are actually from an old roster from a team called Worst Generation, and it was Ju, Val, and I. We were the three that were together from that team, and we came over to Firepower with a fourth player, which is she's not in our roster anymore, but Munch was also on that team, but she was on the mixed team, so she wasn't playing with us at the time. And then Gianna was in another roster. I think it was from PRS Esports, and she lost one of the previous VCTs and then just retired for a bit before she joined us for the previous VCT.
Okay. So, you all have plenty of experience competing then.
Yeah.
For a lot of the players, is Valorant your first esport?
Um, I think for all of us, it's our first esport like in the roster. I don't think any of them have much FPS experience really. Val, this is her first shooter. Also, Ju. Monch comes from a little bit of Overwatch, as do I. And Gianna played some CS, but it was just very little experience before we shifted to Valorant. So we're
Hmm.
kind of new.
Interesting. Well, you all have done quite well for yourselves being with Valorant being kind of the first real like FPS for many of the players. For for that switch from Worst Generation into now Firepower, it did a lot of the roles and kind of like did the IGL switch or anything like that.
Yeah, it was actually our IGL that was the fourth girl that came with us, and she ended up leaving the roster after we tried to move her to be the sixth player. Since there were a lot of complications with her, and also at the time Vakita wasn't around, so we had to look for another sixth player. After all, she just left the team, so we just had to look for a replacement, and Monch stepped up to be the IGL. So
Okay. And when I talk to a few other Game Changers team, a lot of them talk about juggling a lot of other responsibilities like school or work. Is that something that a lot of your players have to do as well?
Oh, yeah. I think all of us have responsibilities outside of the team, like plenty of them. Mostly Munch and Val, they're still in school right now since they're the youngest ones. Ju happens to be in uni, as do I, and Gianna, she just has other things to do since she's the oldest in the team.
Hmm. Okay. Interesting. So, and another reason why it's so interesting that you all have that Valorant being your first FPS or your main FPS, you all have a perfect streak pretty much, except against those games against Skullcracker. So looking at your history, like you haven't really dropped maps except when you're against Skullcracker Fem. So what's it like finally getting to get a hold on Skullcracker Fem for this open?
It was exciting, honestly. We also had a previous tournament before the Game Changers. It was a fight club, and we beat them in a best of five in the final. So
Wow.
we were pretty confident when we went into the final this time, like both times, in the final for the upper bracket and then in the final after they came back from the loser bracket. It was pretty, well, I wouldn't want to say easy, but we were confident that we could beat them since we had already done so once before.
Yeah, no, it felt very confident. So I watched a little bit of the finals, and you all were just rolling through them. It was impressive that so you kept a hold when you beat them in the upper bracket, and then also in the grand finals, because sometimes, like, teams will have a chance to anti-strat you, like, since they played you before. But you all just seem to have that hold on the grand finals. Was that something you were worried about, like, in the grand finals still? Like, that they've played you before and that there was a chance that they could anti-strat you?
I was a little bit worried, but after the picks and we heard that they chose Ascent, I wasn't that concerned after that. All of my teammates were just wondering if they were going to switch out the Astra for the Omen since they hadn't caught up to the meta yet, and they didn't. So that was a mistake on their part, sincerely. And I was just pretty focused on our performance instead of theirs. Like, if they wanted to change their compositions and try to anti-strat us, that was their concern, really. We already had everything planned out beforehand.
And that's actually something I wanted to ask you about. So you seem to have this adaptation towards the new meta, kind of Astra you were playing in the first open, and yet you've adapted to adding Brim and Omen into your comp. So what was that experience like for you trying to adapt to these new roles as well as this kind of newish team?
It was complicated, honestly. I had been competing with Astra a year prior, and just every single tournament I had played in, it was mostly Astra and Viper. And for them to have nerfed both of the characters that I use the most, it was a little bit worrying. I did have experience with Brimstone since we had a Haven composition with him in it, but he was switched out because Astra was clearly superior at the time. So I was worried at first because I had never ever played with Omen. Like, the game came out and I didn't play until like Astro was implemented. So I was a little bit worried since I just never had the chance to play him. He was always weak when I was around, so I just never got to pick him for any tournaments or anything. And we only had like a week to prepare because they didn't tell us which patch we were going to play on, like the blast patch or the new one, and they actually had a reunion to pick which one we should play with. And I had already been scrimming with Omen like that entire week for them to be asking that. So many of the teams voted for us to be using the new patch since they had been doing the same. And Skullcracker, I noticed that they were one of the teams that didn't want to do with the new patch. So, I was pretty confident after that.
Yeah, well, that's impressive that you all were able to do that adaptation. I know a lot of teams in a lot of regions have just been struggling a little bit with that new adaptation, but you were able to thrive in that scenario. So, considering that, are there any other teams or any other regions that you personally or the team follows?
Mm, well, we really like NA teams. We About the game changers, we don't really look at them that much. We mostly look at Brazil for game changers because we think that they're the strongest teams. Well, in my opinion, they are. We like C9 White too, but oh, and G2 goes in, but overall for game changers, we just look at Team Liquid and stuff like that. Their teams are just, they have really good compositions, and the way that they play, the way that they train, they're just very diligent in the way that they do their things. So I respect them a lot.
And how about outside of Game Changers, any teams?
Pardon?
Outside of Game Changers, are there any teams that you follow as well?
Yeah. We follow Gambit a lot and the Guard, and there's some teams in Latin America like Cholo Laser and Leviathan and Crew. Those teams are just, we like to watch them play the most. So
Mhm. Well, it's funny that you mentioned the guard because I know that everyone has been following them
oh
and
yeah.
their run through the NA playoffs. So they're definitely the team to watch and learn from. So What do you think keeps your team at the top? I mentioned earlier you are basically undefeated in your region, and so I'm curious, what do you think puts your team at the top of the region?
Mm, I think we train the most, sincerely. Like we put in the most hours, we put in the most work. Most teams when they win the game changers, they just try to let loose for a little bit. We had Skullcracker win twice once, and then we got in between of their wins. So it was like they didn't think we were going to be able to take their place once, and they just let go of it. So really, we just put in more work.
Okay. Well, with all that work you're putting in, do you have any particular goals for you and your team this year?
Mm, I don't know. I like for us to get ahead in the challengers, maybe. Like if we get to participate later this year, maybe get a little bit ahead. I'm not thinking that we're going to classify, but like if we would at some point, that would be amazing.
Okay. Any plugs or shoutouts that you want to make?
Not really.
Okay, cool. Well, definitely thank you so much for your time. And again, congrats to FirePOWER for winning the second open. And then with how much you train, I'm expecting big things for the rest of the tournaments this year. And if you want to follow FirePOWER, make sure to check out Run It Back for more interviews as well as stats. So thank you so much for your time and catch you all later.